Hello, welcome to the Glass Onion Rabbit Hole. I'm starting this podcast because I have made a really amazing discovery with Stanley Kubrick's movies. And my discovery is that his movies are a glass onion. So, what does that mean, a glass onion? The definition of a glass onion is something that's multi-layered and transparent with a hidden message. So, Kubrick's movies, if you take and you mirror it over itself, so when you take a movie and you put it over itself, the same movie playing backwards, so now you're watching the movie forward and backwards simultaneously. When you add a third layer of video to that, transparent, and then it becomes the glass onion. And in the glass onion with Kubrick's movies, there's a lot of references that are going through the movie. And each reference, when you connect them together, you get a hidden message. And so I've been working on this for about 2.5 years, and I've made a lot of discoveries with Kubrick's movies and this glass onion form. And so so far I've been making a lot of versions of the glass onion. So I went and I started doing mainly with the Beatles movies on The Shining. That's where I first discovered this. And then I started to do it with his other movies, starting with the Space Odyssey movie. And once I saw that it was working there, then I decided to go through all his movies. So one by one, starting with his very first movie, all the way to his last movie. His last movie being the AI movie, which he had Steven Spielberg do. But it's still a glass onion. It's actually his very last glass onion form. Today I heard that Steven Spielberg is going to be doing Kubrick's Napoleon. So Kubrick had done all this work in preparation to shoot a movie about Napoleon, and he never got to do it. So now it looks like, from what I heard, Spielberg announced that he's going to be doing, I think it's a 6-part miniseries based off of Kubrick's off of his script and all the material that he put together. They're going to do a 6-episode series, so that'll be interesting because I'm pretty sure they're going to be glass onions too. It's just the way that Kubrick operated. I think the glass onion, when you see a glass onion, the 3 different layers, and then each layer is a solid color. That way you create this contrast. And the 3 colors are red, green, and sometimes blue. And those are your primary colors. Between those colors, you make up all the other colors. So when you do this glass onion form, you get all these beautiful shades of pink, and, purple, and just a lot of different colors that I don't even know the names of the colors. But so why did he do this? So I believe now that the reason Kubrick did this glass onion form, Kubrick knew a lot of things, and for whatever reason he didn't talk to people about it. He hid all these things in his movies, and he left it to be deciphered with a lot of clues. So when I look at the Space Odyssey movie now, I see all these clues like just smacking me in the face, like, oh yeah, that's a reference to the glass onion. That's a reference to the glass onion. It's just over and over. It's endless, you could say. So Hello, my name is McDonio Rodriguez, and this is the Glass Onion Rabbit Hole. So, this podcast is coming about because for the last 2 years and a half, I have been working on Stanley Kubrick's movies, and I have made some really big discoveries. One of the discoveries that I made is that Kubrick's movies are a glass onion. So a glass onion, a definition of a glass onion is basically something that's multi-layered and transparent with a hidden message. So Kubrick's movie is like it's like a lens. You know, the lens has a couple layers to it. It has the lens in the front, some lenses in between the front and the back, so it's multi-layer. So Kubrick's movie is like one of these lenses that go in between, and when you layer them in transparency with making each one a solid color, if you do the movie over itself, just two layers, then that's called a mirror form, and that's a esoteric cinematic device that you can do that to any movie. But when you start to add another layer and it syncs up, then that's called the glass onion form. And the only person that has done the glass onion form is Stanley Kubrick, and he created this new form. He talked many times to Steven Spielberg about wanting to change the form, change the form. I believe that that's what he meant is with this glass onion. And there's a lot of references to it in the Space Odyssey movie, and there's also a few references to it in the Clockwork Orange, and there's many references to it in The Shining. So The Shining is the one that I started off with, and it started with me just wanting to do a mirror form with the Beatles music on it. This guy named Joe Girard, he made some discoveries, and he actually mirrored the movie and put the songs to the Beatles, specifically the Abbey Road album. So that started me off, and I started to do the mirror form. I started to try to decipher. The way he did it didn't quite work for me, but we're all going to see things differently because that's what the movie is. It just, you keep watching the movie, you keep seeing more references, you make more discoveries. It's like never ending. And so I have a bunch of different versions of The Shining, and they're all making reference to the Beatles, to Beatlemania. Okay, so you have a version of The Shining in glass onion form with Lennon. Lennon documentaries, Lennon's music videos, interviews, you name it. Then you got another version with Paul McCartney. You got versions with each Beatles member, and you have a version that is of Brian Epstein. And the one with Brian Epstein is very interesting because he supposedly accidentally killed himself by overdosing. But when you watch the glass onion form with Brian Epstein, Kubrick is alluding to maybe Epstein was murdered. He was overdosed, but not accidentally. And the little key on the door seems to be a very big clue. I think Kubrick is telling us that the person who did it, they had a key to get in. When his secretary showed up that day and found him dead, they had to actually break the door down. Very similar to the movie where Jack breaks down the bathroom doors. So there's a lot of references like this. There's another version of The Shining with J.D. Salinger. J.D. Salinger, he wrote the book Catcher in the Rye, which became The Rebel in the Rye. And that's the book that supposedly inspired David Chapman. So there's another version with a David Chapman interview. There's another version with a movie that's called chapter 27. So, and then there's some other references. There's Truth Stream Media. They did one on the national parks and how that the U.S. used these national parks to pretty much eradicate the Native Americans that were here, move them off their land by lie, deceit, genocide. It didn't matter. So there's a whole version that syncs up with the movie that it deals with that. And I'm pretty sure there's more versions. There's got to be one that is going to deal with the Aryan Papers. So Kubrick was supposed to do a movie on the Holocaust called the Aryan Papers. So I haven't looked into it yet, but I'm pretty sure there's probably some documentaries out there that are going to sync up with The Shining, and they're going to tell us things. Haven't gotten there yet. It's a rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole goes down many levels, and then it goes this way and that way in directions, in many different directions. Just like the Space Odyssey, the ship in the Space Odyssey, how they're able to go through this tunnel, this way, that way. It went in every which direction. And now when I look at The Shining, I see that The Shining is also a glass onion. Every time that we see people walking from one room into the other and the camera kind of goes through the wall like this, that's basically like a layer of the onion, So there's just too many references. So I'm going to do this podcast because I've made a lot of these videos. Now I'm making videos where I'm explaining my videos. So I have versions of glass onion form of, with different references. So each reference, I'm going to do a video explaining and pointing out where the references are. And for people who want to see my full versions of the movies, then they're going to have to go to my Patreon page, and I'm going to have them all archived on there. And it's something that you can't watch just one time. You have to watch it many times. Now, the interesting thing about Kubrick's Glass Onion, each movie is a reference to a different rock and roll legend. Someone who elevated rock and roll to another level. So it starts with the first movie that he made is called Flying Padre. And the Flying Padre is making reference to Robert Johnson, who is credited as being the father of rock and roll. Apparently, without Robert Johnson, we wouldn't have rock and roll. And he's an interesting character because he made a deal with the devil. And the reference in the movie is the Flying Padre, and this guy made a deal with the devil. It's some kind of duality, and sometimes the mirroring is a reflection but flipped. So haven't quite gone down the rabbit hole there. I've gone through all his movies and I have deciphered which rock and roll pioneer legend of that time, or actually the way I found them is looking for when the movie came out, and then who was the most influential rock and roll pioneer of that time, like with 2 or 3 years after the movie came out. That's the pattern. And so I went through each movie, looking at the year it came out, then looking 2-3 years into the future, who was the most influential, and then start to Google a little bit about each performer. I see what the titles of their songs are, and you can see right away if it's making reference to the movie. And so yeah, I got to do that to each movie. I didn't do the whole movie. I just did like the first couple songs, and when I saw that they synced up, I'm like, okay, boom, that's the artist that's being referenced in the movie, and I did that for each one of his movies. And even the movie AI came out after Kubrick was dead, but Kubrick had given that movie to Steven Spielberg to make, and Steven Spielberg made that movie. It came out 2001. AI, artificial intelligence, and again, it makes sense, right? Because the movie Space Odyssey takes place in 2001, or it's a reference to 2001, and the movie AI comes out in 2001. You could not do that. Space Odyssey would not be possible. None of that technology without AI. So Kubrick is like predicting what year the AI movie is going to be released after his death. And it's funny because I have an interview with Steven Spielberg where it's from the documentary Remembering Kubrick, and he mentions in the documentary that because he had been collaborating with Kubrick like for a couple years before he started shooting and during the shooting of Eyes Wide Shut, and so they were collaborating, just communicating back and forth for many hours on the phone. And in some of those conversations, Kubrick talked to him about changing the form, and Spielberg right away, he says, well, didn't you do that with the Space Odyssey movie? And Kubrick says, yeah, a little bit, but I want to do it, I want to make a real change, create a real form. And so without him knowing, Steven Spielberg is having a conversation about this new form and doesn't even realize he is going to be producing Kubrick's last glass onion form once he passes. And I'm pretty sure he still doesn't know that his movie is a glass onion. So a lot of discoveries. So the first video, I'm touching on the glass onion. I show a lot of examples, a little bit from all the different versions. I try to break down what I think Kubrick is telling us in these references. And the other thing I'm going to be talking about on my podcast is also the video that I'm going to do on Kubrick, because I have this hypothesis on how Kubrick was able to do these things. But this is going to take time. This is not going to be an easy video, because my hypothesis is basically the gist of my hypothesis is that Kubrick, with the movie The Shining, he is telling us that he is the shiny one. And when you look up the shiny ones, they go all the way back to biblical times, and what it more or less breaks down to is that the shiny ones were this ancient priesthood that they were influential in having influence over religion, over government, through art, through poetry, through music, and it's very secretive, this priesthood, and it's been something that has been kind of passed down and passed down. I believe that Kubrick is basically
I am Apollo. About me. My parents are Zeus and Leto, and I have a twin sister named Artemis. I am the god of many things. I am the god of music, prophecy, colonization, medicine, archery, poetry, dance, sun/light, truth, sickness, healing, plague, and care of the herds and flocks.